Please welcome the founder and principal consultant at Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda, Judy Kepher-Gona, in conversation with Skift Editor-at-Large, Lebawit Girma.
Hi, Judy. Thank you so much for being here today. It's nice to see you again. All the way from Mombasa.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So you and I have spoken several times in the past because of your work in sustainable tourism and your focus on integrating host communities into tourism and how we do that. And we're going to really deep dive on the latter from different lenses. But first, I'd love to know what you're working on right now that you're pretty excited about in that space.
Thank you, Lily. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Right now, I am working on a project in Mombasa, Kenya, called the Kenya Go Blue project. The Go Blue economy is a big investment area for Kenya's government. It is a priority area in what they call the government medium-term plan from 2018. That's going to end, I think, somewhere end of this year, but it's renewable. As we speak here, Kenya and Portugal were co-hosting the Oceans Conference in Lisbon. The president was there and high-level delegations from Kenya. There is a big EU-funded project with 7 European countries involved. It's called the Go Blue Kenya project. Within it, there's a component of cultural heritage and tourism. And I'm excited that I'll be working on this, supporting this project with technical assistance for the next 28 months, just to see how we can get the voice and a place for community in the blue economy, because if we don't, it will end up being an ocean agenda. And the blue economy is not just an ocean agenda. If we have to save our oceans, we must first of all save our communities.
Right. So host communities, we're going to look at it, as I said earlier, through different lenses. So I'm glad you spoke of your project now. The climate lens. The Glasgow Declaration has brought together over 400 signatories. We've seen, as large as UNWTO to smaller tour operators in places that are already climate impacted. Still, a lot of the industry is missing, but the conversation is pushing forward. And I'm wondering, are we talking too much about science and not how we can make host communities a part of it, or is it for them? How do we address the other spectrum of it?
Thank you. There is still a lot of science. There's still a lot of science that is being spoken around climate change. So when you talk to communities about the percentages that we've got to reduce the global warming by this percentage by this time, that's a language, allow me to say this, that's a language that goes you're speaking over the head of the community. The community wants to find out, for example, the pastoralist communities have gone through a hard time because of extended drought in parts of East Africa, constant loss of livestock, there is constant loss, crop failure. And so they're looking for livelihood answers. They're looking for what will we do with our livestock in the meantime? What will we do with our farms at the moment? Yeah, even as you talk. So the conversations have to come down to the communities, and communities are always about livelihoods. When I mentioned pastoralism, that's a livelihood for the pastoralist communities. So what does it mean for the pastoralist in Masai Mara, for example, who has seen from COVID-19, they now tell you to your face that we can no longer trust tourism. Wow. Because when tourism collapsed, we were left with our cattle. all these years you came to us and you told us that tourism was a better option, and that tourism would continue to grow, and the tourism numbers would increase, and as they increase, we would get more revenue. But we realize over and over again the vulnerability of tourism now, not just from COVID, but there's also vulnerability related to climate. So there is need to translate the science into livelihood actions, and to take those actions to the ground. Take them. I was having a conversation on this with the Go Blue Economy project here in Mombasa, and my strongest message, even as they went to Lisbon, because the project was represented in Lisbon, and I was involved in organizing a side event. And I said, when you go to Lisbon, our message is going to be on livelihoods. And our side event was about livelihoods. We spoke about building skills. We spoke about maritime security. We spoke about youth employment in destinations that are vulnerable to climate, like coastal destinations. So giving the human face to the climate agenda.
And so the vulnerability to me is a barrier, obviously. And so, how can tourism businesses make this conversation and action more inclusive? I mean, where do they even begin is my question.
Yes, it's not, I don't think that I have the answer to this, but it is something that we must look for together. When COVID happened, conversations happened at different levels. And at that particular time, tourism reached out to communities. The good tourism businesses reached out to communities. And I saw practical examples of negotiated business deals between communities here in Kenya. And it works very well. And all this, all this thinking and narratives that communities don't understand tourism, and they don't understand its vulnerabilities, and they don't understand its complexity, was demystified, because they sat around the table and they said, yes, we understand what COVID has done for the industry, and we are ready for those businesses, companies that are doing business with us. We are ready to meet middle ground. And I saw communities concede income and say, yes, we will not expect any payments for this time. So what am I saying? We must, if we want to engage at that level, the communities are always willing. But the thing is, most of the time, they are excluded in the conversation because it is thought that they don't understand a lot of things deeply.
Right. It's assumed that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Regenerative tourism, we've heard a little bit about that earlier also with Daryl Wade from Intrepid Travel. So regenerative tourism, buzzword or real concept, or just distracting from the main goals yet again? Who's responding to this? What do you think?
Lily, to be honest, I'm asking myself who is responding to this. I've been asking myself that question of a long time, and I said, aren't we just, at some point I said, aren't we just adding more layers on what is already complex for a lot of businesses? Sustainability is already complex for many businesses. And now we have regeneration. Before even the tourism industry could respond to sustainability. And I believe that sustainability is a basic foundation for doing things responsibly. Whether you're calling it regeneration, whether you're calling it responsible, whether you're calling it enlightening tourism, whether you're calling it pro-poor tourism, whether you're calling it environmental tourism, whichever you call it, we actually have a baseline. And that baseline is that we must give equal attention to people, planet, and profit. And if regeneration is about giving equal attention to people, planet, and profit, what is going to be significantly different with the concept? Because yes, I have been asked in other forums, Judy, why aren't you talking regenerative tourism? Why are you stuck with the sustainability and not regenerative? And I say that I believe that regeneration is anchored somewhere within sustainability. And so the basic foundation is sustainability. Now, there are questions that also come to mind when we have new concepts like this. We ask ourselves questions like, what does regenerative want to redefine in tourism? What exactly will it change? Is it looking at changing systems? Is it looking at changing mindsets? Is it looking at redefining how the tourism industry perceives luxury? Is it about redistribution? Is it what really is regenerative redefining for us?
I feel like it's the first two, perhaps. I mean, I was recently at a conference with Destination Canada, and they've adopted regenerative tourism as part of their, tourism plan now, and it's really pushing them to collaborate more with their Indigenous communities in terms of providing more Indigenous-led, Indigenous-owned experiences, and really coming together as part of a way to reinvent their model. And it's kind of, I feel like it puts the lens more on host communities and benefiting host communities more directly than in the past. But
yeah.
many destinations are doing that.
You can say that, Lily. But if you speak to academics, they will tell you that they have found a new area of research, which means they're also trying to understand what is this thing. A new area of research has been opened for them to trying to understand what is this thing regenerative and how is it different from all other concepts of sustainability that the tourism industry has had until now. Right. Now, having said that, I think like the industry, I'm open to any ideas that will move this industry forward. Right. And address every challenge that this industry has had. Let me just say one more thing about that. When I say move this industry forward, before COVID, the industry was struggling with the concept of over-tourism. We saw the realities of over-tourism. Is regenerative tourism part of addressing over-tourism? And that's why I said, what exactly are we redefining? Have we thrown away some of our problems and now are moving forward to the future? Adding
more complexities.
Yes.
Right. So let's turn to the lens of labor, and a lot of the focus has been on the future of the workforce in terms of upskilling or labor shortages, but you've really focused on the youth and why it's critical for the sector to really pay attention to not just training and bringing on new workers, but also at the youth level. Tell us what your thinking is around that, and particularly for your destination in Kenya and others.
Yes, I think for Africa and even Kenya, the youth, engaging the youth, upskilling them, training them for every sector, not just tourism, is the future. Because by 2050, we are told more than 60% of our population in Africa will be youthful.
Right.
And so we must start early enough to integrate them into the tourism value chain. In Kenya, and I believe in many other African destinations, it is critical for the tourism industry. I have a program that I run with universities that teach tourism in Kenya, a youth mentorship program. With that program enables me to interact with a number of many hundreds of thousands of students from 17 universities. I've been doing that since 2017. And it's an extension learning program that enables the youth to meet other youth from other universities, but also meet industry practitioners every month through our inter-university seminars on sustainable development of tourism. Now, I recently learned from one of the seminars we had that 75% of graduates of tourism and hospitality are not working in tourism.
Wow.
That's for many of these universities, even the high-end universities, they are less than, in some universities, it's less than 15% of their graduates who are ending up in the tourism industry. Why? They have lost faith in this industry. And the number one reason why they have lost faith in tourism is because of wage issues. They feel like
Right.
labor is abused in the tourism
Yeah.
industry, that tourism does not pay fair wages. And because tourism, the services that are required in hospitality can be provided by unskilled labor that has been trained on the job, which means that employers can get cheap labor than university graduates. They prefer that cheap labor and they continuously employ the cheap labor. They only employ 2 or 3 managers from the university and everybody else. So the space is not there for them. And even when
Yeah.
they get in there, they feel like it's
Right.
not a fair employment.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's to me, the heart of it really is equity and inclusion.
Yes.
Throughout all of this, from climate action to labor and all of these lenses that we've been looking at the core of it is equity inclusion. And so how should businesses better consider and assess these inequities that are in so many destinations? What conversations are not being had while there's a focus on regeneration and all of these I mean, they're all important. Science-based metrics, all of that is important. But what isn't being discussed here in terms of that equity lens?
What isn't being discussed is how the industry is using labor, the workforce in the tourism industry. It's not receiving the attention that it should. And in some places, in some countries, even in my own country, whenever that issue comes around or you talk about it in tourism meetings, then there's a discomfort, and it's like you're entering now into labor issues. We should not be talking labor issues. There's a labor law in this country. We are not the ones who make the labor laws. If we are allowed to pay this minimum wages, why are you even bringing it up? It's an uncomfortable conversation for the tourism industry. I don't know for the rest of the world, but it is uncomfortable for tourism in Africa to discuss labor and wages, because it's one of the areas that labor is abused. I always like to tell stories, and if I have 1 minute, I'll tell a story.
Absolutely, we have about 5. Yeah.
I'll tell a story of a young man, not a young man, maybe he's in his 40s, that I met, who is from South Coast of Kenya. And he said, I don't understand how this industry works. My father worked in a hotel for many years until he retired. Before he retired, him and his friends started operating. They acquired an old boat. They bought an engine through a cooperative of themselves, and they started doing boat tours to go to the marine park. And even then, they would face fierce competition from the hotels who own similar boats. Now, my father is retired. I have taken over, and because the only thing that we know, I've never known a livelihood outside of the sea since I was born. And so now I operate the same boat, and I'm in the same predicament as my father. The income is low. The hotel will charge what the hotel will charge $50 for. We will charge $15 in order to get clients. Otherwise, we will never get them. That is how wages and inclusion issues are real in tourism.
It's a cycle. It's a cycle, isn't it? So how do we break the cycle? Yeah, that's one of the things that's not being addressed. Okay. But then when it works, you can scale it. And so how do you scale what works? We was mentioning earlier, you and I in the green room, that there are really great examples of the good side of tourism in terms of the economic benefits, but also the preservation of culture. There are communities where this really works in a collaborative way with the destination DMO, collaboration between the two. And so how do we scale what works though when it comes to communities? Is it scalable, or is it too specific for each host community?
It is scalable. From East Africa and Kenya in particular, how we have managed, or the industry has managed to scale up some of the best practices, is by ensuring that they are entrenched in the regulatory systems or tourism policy, not just the regulation. So in conservation and tourism in Kenya, we always say that everything that is good that you see in the conservation policy and our tourism policy was preceded by practice, by a few operators who went out of their way, by a few businesses who went out of their way to do something good and something noble. And because of that, they were able to convince the system, the governance system of tourism and conservation, that we can actually do it differently. So one way of scaling it up is to bring it into policy. Another way of scaling it up is to get more investments in initiatives that are working. If there's a program that is working to support community integration in the tourism value chain or the youth integration, if we put more investment in it, we accelerate it. And when we accelerate it, the impact is quickly felt. Otherwise, we have many islands of companies that are doing good things, but the impact is not felt. They're not able to accelerate. So investment and policy, top of the list for me on how we can scale up.
Great. And that eventually creates more trust with host communities.
Yes.
And there are pockets of good things happening in terms of some of the destinations that are really figuring this out and trying to do better in terms of integrating their residents. But to wrap up, I really would love to hear what you think of the future. What might global tourism and host community relationships look like in the next decade?
It's scary sometimes to think about it from my Kenyan context. I've been involved for many years, more than 20 years, trying to get the communities in the tourism value chain. The efforts bore fruit more than about 15 years ago. It is now looking more promising. And now I can see that the system, the tour operators, tourism businesses are feeling uncomfortable that if communities have so much control and power and decision-making about tourism investments, that this may affect tourism and may affect investments. But I am confident that there is a future of collaboration. There's a future in equity. If there is equity in distribution of tourism opportunities and benefits in destinations, then the future of tourism is very bright. But without equity in sharing of the benefits that come out of tourism, then we might have a very bleak future for tourism, because the communities, the generation that was ignorant is retired. There's another generation, and they're asking the right questions. And tourism had better have the right answers.
I love that. Thank you so much, Judy. We really value your time today, coming from all the way Mombasa, Kenya. So thank you for those insights, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much.